In 2013, I had a book launch in the city of Darwin. If you're not familiar with Darwin, Darwin is a beautiful city of about 100,000 people. It's at the top end of Australia. It's in the tropical zone, surrounded by not only sharks and mangrove swamps, but beautiful beaches. It's a remarkable, cosmopolitan, multicultural city. And a friend up there, a local priest, had built up very strong relationships with the LGBTIQ community there. And so he knew I wanted to launch this book. It was a little book, a potboiler, a theological potboiler about love. I think it sold 67 copies. But anyway, my friend invited me up to Darwin to launch the book there, and in particular to launch it at the Throb nightclub. So imagine the scenario. It's about 10 o'clock at night, way past my bedtime. There am I with my friend and I, dressed in black with our dog collars, going into Throb nightclub. Anyway, we had a fabulous night. In addition to the free eats and glasses of champagne, we were welcomed, made very much to feel at home. And it was quite moving really to talk about the importance of love and the significance of love in that setting. So with about 40 people in attendance, I launched the book and we concluded with some photographs. There are some wonderful photographs of me and my friend circulating around in Australia, holding up the book and surrounded by these gorgeous drag queens. The whole experience was great and we partied on. I think we stayed up till nearly 1 o'clock and we left. But at that stage, the nightclub just continued on regardless. But that experience of the book launch, the welcome we received, the conversations we had, young men and women, transgender people, drag queens, who knew what it was to live on the edge. They lived most of their lives on the boundary. And so because of that, friendship, getting together and celebrating had such a powerful meaning for them, and it was inclusive. It was generous. It incorporated me and my friend into it just quite naturally. It's a wonderful image, that book launch, an image of how things ought to be. I want to explore now. In many ways, it's a big topic, but I want to explore the relationship of the LGBTIQ communities and the Christian church. Specifically, I want to explore the impact of queer philosophy or queer theology upon the life of the church. So let me start in a very concrete manner. Let me go back to the experience of many of those people at Throb nightclub who lived on the edge. Jesus was very concerned about people who lived on the edge. In the Gospel of Matthew, he had a wonderful phrase to describe these people. And he referred to those on the margins as these little ones. It doesn't quite translate that way. The phrase these little ones is not meant to be a diminutive. It's meant to underline the fact that these people are at the extremes of our society, hanging on, trying to survive. So this phrase and variations of it occur in chapter 25 in the Gospel of Matthew, in the parable of the sheep and the goats. There's several references to it in chapter 18, but the one that I've got in mind comes from chapter 10. And in chapter 10, it's like a pastiche. There are several passages or texts put together. They don't really follow a sequence. Nevertheless, there's one part where it talks about Jesus is addressing the disciples and trying to encourage them. And in many ways, he's seeing the disciples now as being on the edge. Because of the commitment that they've taken up, they're on the edge and they're expected to look after those on the edge. And he's reassuring them not to worry, because in this venture, God, who cares even for the sparrows, God who even knows how many hairs there are on our heads, cares for us intimately, substantially, and consistently. And it is this reassurance that this is a God who cares for them, cares for these little ones, that empowers them to go on their mission. So, in the Gospel of Matthew, people are called to follow the cause of Jesus, this subversive, inclusive, open cause. And the test or the measure of the cause is how the disciples respond to these little ones, to those on the edge, like those wonderful people I met at Throb nightclub. So let's take this deep passionate concern from the Christian tradition and put it in our own context. Traditionally in the church, when it's come to issues of sexuality, we've often started at the wrong end. I've sat in councils and synods of the church, and people have used the phrase, the gay problem. Let's start with the gay problem, or let's address the gay problem. Now, these statements are often said oblivious to the fact that in those assemblies are many LGBTIQ persons. And also, it presents it in such a way as if to say, we're blaming those people on the edge for being on the edge. The issue in the life of the church is really about the straight problem. It's our problem. It's our problem of translating the concerns of Jesus for compassion and justice into the 21st century. So with that in mind, I want to explore what that great American theologian Carter Haywood refers to as a queer conspiracy. By that, she's referring to the insights and the prophetic ministry that queer people bring to the life of the church, let alone society. Now, as a footnote to this, I need to say something about the word queer. Historically, the word queer was a negative word. Someone was dismissed as being queer or odd or acceptable. In recent decades, in some circles, the word has been adopted and adapted. It's been given a positive construal. And there is now a serious academic stream, both in theology and philosophy, of queer thinking. Queer thinking doesn't take things for granted. Queer thinking questions assumptions. Queer thinking asks difficult questions about how we got to a particular place. It deconstructs. It challenges things. It gets people to think things through. As it is then, it represents a significant contribution not only to academic life, but also to the life of the Christian church. So with that in mind, I want to look at two aspects of this queer conspiracy to which Jesus is inviting us to join. The first thing is about queering God. Historically, God has, in many ways, in the life of the Western church, looked like a watered-down version of Charlton Heston. Muscular, strong, macho, white, straight, usually described with the metaphor of either the king or the judge. Particularly the metaphor of the judge implies certain punitive constraints. Now, for a whole range of reasons, particularly the Second World War and the Holocaust, that view of God, the muscular God, the God who is king, the God who is judge, has lost credibility. It doesn't speak to the heart of human concerns and complex human situations. And it's at that point that this extraordinary body of work of queer theology and queer philosophy causes us to rethink the nature of God. Ironically, if we go back to the passage from Matthew chapter 10, the image of God there who cares for the sparrows, who knows even the hairs on the head of God's followers, is a very intimate image. It is a tender God, a feminine God. You see, not only have we grown up with a Charlton Heston God, but we've often gone back to ancient scriptures and we've looked at them through that lens. And when we go back in the past, we see a complex and multifaceted understanding of the nature of the divine, that the sacred can manifest itself in a multitude of ways. Now, I can't give a simple answer to the nature and significance of God, but I can invite you, as I feel invited to do, to explore our understanding of God, because that has a huge impact on our behaviour and our values and attitudes. And sometimes when I reflect back to that wonderful night at Throb nightclub, I felt intuitively I learnt more about life in the divine that night than I have by reading 100 theological books. The second aspect that I want to explore, having began to investigate the idea of queering God, is the process of queering church. And I guess you could say this is something of a thought experiment. And the thought experiment is this, that when churches gather together in meetings or councils, have a look at the place at which we start. Have a look at the God whom we serve, the Jesus that we follow. And look at the premises that we bring to our discussions. Even the simple gesture, the simple fact of recognising that in the past we've started in a very negative fashion by talking about the gay problem instead of the straight problem. And this is not to condemn us, but to invite us into a new way of thinking and experiencing. We live in turbulent times where all sorts of people on the margins for all sorts of reasons, because of gender, sexuality, colour, poverty, are experiencing more and more pressure and more oppression. So these issues today about how we respond to these little ones and how we let these little ones shape us, change our thinking and practices, are critical, existential, theological questions. They are questions for a 21st century church. I'm hoping at some stage later this year, perhaps August and September, or September if I'm game to get on a plane, is to maybe go back to Darwin. And I think if we do, I'm going to go back to the Throb nightclub. I may not be able to stay up till 1 o'clock this time, but there was something about the atmosphere of that nightclub, the welcome we received, and the joy of the evening. There I was, a senior white straight guy in a dog collar with a mate, talking about love, and we experienced love quite naturally, quite spontaneously, and the whole event was full of joy. These little ones, these people who live on the edges, look at life in a very different way to us. And they have something really significant to teach us about what it means to be a human being. Being a human being is a complex, never-ending task, and there's always something that we can learn. So, in the tradition of Jesus, who sought out the company of the little ones and enjoyed it, there's new wisdom here, new possibilities of learning, new possibilities for us of being the church in a way that is deeply inclusive, radically compassionate, and ultimately collaborative. In the name of God, Creator, Redeemer, and Sustainer. Amen.